Hi, here at Mi-Soul at the Southport Heritage Weekender with someone who was here right at the very beginning, and not just the beginning of Southport, it's the beginning of the soul scene in the UK. It's the legendary Colin Curtis.
Hey, welcome along. Yes, right at the beginning, with the dinosaurs.
So how many years have you been DJing now?
This is the 47th.
47?
47 years, yeah.
You've been prolific right from the very beginning and still on the music as strong as you were from day one. So what's kept you going all this time?
Music. Yeah, purely music. Because I mean, my initial interest in black music came through pirate radios, really. Listening to UK pirate radios, managing to find the records, and then starting to leave the house, shall we say, and look around at clubs, DJing, and most of the clubs were, in those days, were the bigger clubs were run by Meccas, which were mainly relying all the time on live bands, stuff like that. DJ was a very secondary role, and I came across this place in Tunstall called The Torch, and I went there. I'd be about probably 14, and I walked in, it should be a Wednesday night, something like that, and I just heard music that I'd never heard before, alongside some of the stuff I'd collected. I spent the next day climbing out the bedroom window because my father had grounded me for going there in the first place, and I walked all the way there. It was about 4.5 miles to find out it was closed when I got there. It's an old story, but it just brings back so many memories for me. But yeah, it was Pete Stringfellow's brother. Who was actually DJing there that night, and starting to hear records that were outside of my remit at the time, but that then got me on this. I've got a fanatical personality, and if I'm going to do anything, I have to do it 150%. So I just started chasing down records and buying records that people mail order, finding places like FL Moore down the south, and shipping imported records up. And I mean, that was a big change. I mean, most of the soul music you originally bought in those days was all British release labels, and of course, as you learnt more about the genre, you would look on the label and see that these had come from American labels, and digging a bit deeper again, finding out importers and building it that way.
So that was your first introduction, I guess, into soul music, and,
yes.
then DJing, and then you became a prolific part of the Northern Soul scene. So how did that come about? How did you get your break into actually DJing rather than...
Well, as I say, the club that I initially went to, the Golden Torch, whereas at the Meccas there would be regular sessions, and if there was 2 or 3 rooms in a Mecca, you'd get one room where we could designate a soul room. At that point, I would say none of these had developed into what people now know as Northern Soul. Based around mainly Atlantic and Stax in the early days, and then as I say, the import music started coming in, and this developed. But at the Torch, the Wednesdays and Fridays became soul nights, and more imported music started to get played. And then the phenomena, and it was a phenomena at the time, people started to travel from Manchester, from Wolverhampton, the West Midlands, and you realised that there was something more to this, and as that pressure started to develop in the club, Keith Minshall and myself approached the owner of the club to do an all-nighter, at which he laughed at us and said the police won't allow it. I mean, initially, obviously, the police were as naive as everybody else, but eventually they allowed that, and the Torch for me was the start of the Northern scene. I had a local gig at the Mecca Sunday night where we'd do 300-400 people back in those days, playing some of the early soul and moving on from the British labels to imported.
So is the way you got into DJing putting on your own nights and then DJing?
No, I used to run a mobile disco, so I would always incorporate some soul music in that. Right. Even some people's weddings got turned into soul nights.
Whether they liked it or not.
Yeah, whether they liked it or not. Certainly, as if they weren't dancing to the stuff we tried to make them to. But yes, it was a mixture of working. Regular DJ work as resident soul nights at the Meccas, and then developing through clubs like the Torch, and then after that, as the scene developed with all-nighters and all-dayers, I got involved a little bit more in promoting as well.
And what's really interesting about you and your career is lots of DJs get stuck in a particular era, yes, and a particular sound, but you've always moved with the times.
Yes.
So how did you then transition out of the Northern Soul thing into sort of disco, boogie?
Because for me, there weren't, and there still aren't, any barriers to the way I treat music, and most of the labels that are on the scene, most of the labels that you're talking about, Northern Soul, Jazz Funk, house music, whatever those labels were, those labels came after I started playing that type of music. I mean, in Manchester, for instance, in the 80s, and I remember an incident down at Bognor, where Paul Oakenfold was there, and he was in my chalet rooting through where did I get these Chicago records from. This is before the house thing exploded, and my excitement is the next record that I hear, and that's constantly been my excitement. So Northern Soul was easy for me to move on, because as the mid-70s developed, America went from playing a lot of James Brown and a lot of ballads on the radio to starting to play the new, more up-tempo music. So we were hearing American radio stations, WBLS, WKLN, and so we would get cassettes from them. Ian Levine, my partner at the time, was going over to America, coming back with 4,000 or 5,000 records at a time. Coupled with the music I was getting from John Anderson at Soul Bowl, I'd probably got my own internet, all those years ago, and so a phenomenal exposure to a vast amount of music. And as I went to Manchester, it was eventually termed jazz funk, but I was just playing new music constantly. Philadelphia had evolved with Gene Cohn, Dexter Wansel, RCA had signed up, your Kenny Burks and Michael Wyckoff, so the whole thing was just starting to develop. And then bang, along comes Africa Bambaataa, and everybody, the soul fans all run for the hills, and again it gets balanced out. I think for me what happens is that the best of those things are then taken forward, as was proved with a lot of the early guys who were finding the 7-inch singles, doing the beats, working out like the 45, all that sort of stuff in the early days. And when you see the difference between huge stars like Kenny Dope and Louis, where the different backgrounds have come from, and for me this is all, it's data, it's input, it gives me information and allows me to make my decisions, which constantly evolve with new music, because I want to hear the next new thing, whether it's soul, whether it's house. And my secret passion, jazz, it's not much of a secret, but I love it.
So we talked about earlier about the transition from sort of into all-nighters and how that happened. Mm-hmm. Now we're at Southport. Mm-hmm. Weekenders became a big thing in the 80s, and you were there right at the very beginning.
Yes.
So what was it like at the beginning of the whole Weekender thing?
I remember getting the call from this was following the Bognor Regis event that I discussed, where I remember speaking with people like Nicky Holloway, who were talking about going to Ibiza. In the north of England, we were struggling to get people to Birmingham, never mind to Ibiza. So, the travel thing, and obviously the airports in London offered a different potential. But on that same weekend, where I DJ'd with Giles Peterson in his early days, Clear with a live act, Alex Lowe's was talking about doing his own Weekenders, and these guys were talking about Ibiza. So much was crammed into that one weekend that eventually became history. Alex phoned me and said he was doing Berwick. I was in hospital at the time. I didn't get out in time to do Berwick, and I did the very first one, which was the second Up North Weekender, which was at the Caliground in Fleetwood. And it was hit and hope. I mean, in those early days, we got live acts like Phyllis Hyman, Gene Cohn, Marlena Shaw. We got rooms playing jazz. We got rooms playing the soul and the funk and soul, and then also what started to evolve was people looking back at the 7-inch scene as well. So we got a diverse interest and lots of interest. So it was caravans, it was great camaraderie, it was just fantastic fun. I mean, for the whole weekend. And for me, some of the great memories were the radio shows, where people would take them home on the cassette, and that would then feed music to people that you couldn't play in your set, but you'd play on the radio, and that whole camaraderie thing built up, and Southport built up into the phenomenon that it was.
In the early days, you were quite embryonic in the development of Southport, but now it's kind of morphed into something completely different. It's now not even in Southport. We're back at Southport for a Heritage Weekend, but it's now in Minehead. Yes. How have you seen it change over the years from when you started?
I think change is always good. I mean, what role I can play, nowadays as a 61-year-old, what role you can play convincing younger people to listen to this music. I mean, for me, the route has been the internet, I suppose. But I still promote my own nights. We do freestyling, we do vibe nights, we still offer a mixture of music, and so it's just a matter of me finding a place that I can fit in and offer something that's going to be useful to give people the opportunity to listen to some of the music that I think it deserves listening to. And I think the Weekenders have evolved as the house scene went through the 90s. Huge DJs came out of that, as we all know. But I remember in the early days, I mean, people like Graham Parker used to work for us at Rock City for about 30, 40 pounds back in those days. And we're watching people like Graham develop in the UK, and then watching and having the opportunity to bring American stars to events like this was just a phenomenal time. So that, coupled with the progress with jazz, which went into broken beat and has now ironically gone back to its roots again in jazz dance, just so many scenarios that were interesting and remain interesting for me.
And I have to talk to you about the here and now. You're very prolific in the independent soul scene. You discover a lot of music and you're spreading the word of lots of new music, both in independent soul and soulful house as well. Yeah. How do you keep on top of that? You
don't have a full-time job. You just do this as you're living in your life. And I think after some personal tragedies with my family, I decided that I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to my own family and also to music again, and it's allowed me over the last sort of 10 years to refocus and look at all the genres, because I don't close the doors. What you said about some DJs who played 60s soul back in the day still play it today, and they love it just as much, and I accept that. And the same as people with jazz funk and soul. I mean, particularly in the south of England, I have to say, a lot of the gigs rely on that particular era from sort of 78 to about 83, 84, when all these huge acts came along like Maze, and so there is.
You still play some of that stuff as well?
Of course, yeah. I mean, we do specifically themed nights where we do jazz funk. I mean, the jazz funk room at Blackburn, Soul Night Out, for instance, lasted for, I think, 18, 19 years before eventually we gave up the ghost, and now we're looking at developing something different that will incorporate some of that, but will also incorporate the change of attitude from soul fans to vocal house music, and even on your own show. I now notice that the format, and that's, for me, that's fantastic to see, that people are given the opportunity to hear, all soul music in all its forms, and it is soul music. For me, it's soul music. Even instrumentals, even jazz can be soul music, and I just don't have those barriers. And I appreciate and I respect that people do, but for me, no, it has to be open.
And you still get the same buzz out of DJing that you did when you first started?
I don't think there is a better buzz than watching a room full of people dancing to a record that 10 minutes ago they'd never heard before in their lives. For me, that's the buzz, that's the money, that's the sex, that's everything. That's what it's all about.
And how does it feel to be back here? Because you haven't done Southport for a while, have you?
No, I did Minehead, I did a couple of Mineheads. But again, after conversations with Alex, I felt that what I'd got to offer we didn't quite have the format to cater for that in that, and I'm sure Southport will develop very well down there. The numbers are high and the interest is high, so I just keep my eye on it and see if further down the line there may be a role that I can play. But as I say, nowadays we have the promotions coupled with I get up at 9 o'clock, I'm on the computer at 9 o'clock every morning looking for new music.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have you, especially for the Heritage Weekender.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure I'm still alive to be here.